Hi students, coming to the next topic in the subject database management system is constraints. So in the previous video, I explained about a relational model, means a table, a relation. If you take a table, what are the properties you have to follow while you are creating a table? So now coming to the constraints. So what is a constraint? Constraint is nothing but a condition. Means you are mentioning some condition. So based on the condition, you are creating a table. So a table will be created. So in the table, some constraints will be followed. Means some conditions has to be followed to retrieve a data. So let us see what is this constraint. A constraint means here every relation means every table. Every relation has some condition. That must hold for it. So whatever the relation you have taken, means whatever the table you have taken that has some condition that must hold for it to be a valid relation called relational integrity constraint. Relational, you call it as a relational integrity constraint. So what it mean? So here it's saying, so whatever a table you are taking, okay, so this is a relation. So this relation has some condition that must hold for it to be a valid relation. How you can say this is a valid relation? Valid table or a valid relation. So based on some conditions. So if those conditions is satisfied, then you can say it is a valid table. That concept you call it as a relational integrity constraint. It's just checking a condition. Means based on the conditions, it is checking whether this table is valid or not. The table, whatever the relation we are using in the database, that is a valid or not, that is identified by this constraint, relational integrity constraint. Now let us see what are the conditions, what are the constraints that you have to follow while you are creating the tables. Actually, there are three types of constraints will be present while you are creating a database tables. The first one is key constraint. Means based on the key constraint, based on the key condition, we are checking whether the given table is valid or not. So key constraint, or another name is entity constraint. And the next is domain constraint. Domain, I said each value in a table, you call it as a domain. Each value. So whatever the value that is there in a table. So based on these, with the help of these domains, we will check the condition and we are verifying whether the table is valid or not. So another method is domain constraints. And next, referential integrity constraint. Referential integrity constraints. So these are the three different types of constraints. So let us see the one by one. So what is the first key constraint? So key constraints mean it forces that this key constraint forces that in a relation, I'm writing the points, so just see here, in a relation with a key. Key is nothing but it's a value, means it's just an attribute. So a key is nothing but we are selecting one attribute in a table. So in a relation with a key attribute, no two tuples, means no two rows can have identical values for key attribute. So no two tuples can have identical values. So that is saying two tuples means this is a two rows. Suppose this is an attribute. ID is an attribute. Name, address. So this is a table. So what it's saying, in a relation means in a table with a key attribute. So here I am taking ID as a key attribute. Here no two tuples means these two tuples can have identical values. So same values are not possible. So if the same values will be there, if you make it as a key attribute, then this relation is invalid. So if you want to make it as a valid, you just write 2. So here distinct values, different values will be there. So that is here the key constraint. So if you want to check based on the key constraint, I am checking whether my relation table is valid or not. So in a relation with a key attribute, so this is a key attribute, has no two tuples can have identical values for a key attribute. Only for the key attribute. For this you can make, so ID1 is having the same name Bhanu. At the same time ID2 is having the same name Bhanu. So the other attributes may be identical. But the key attribute can have, means no two tuples can have the same values. So we are just checking this attribute. So that is the first constraint. And next, key attribute. Actually, while seeing it is somewhat complicated, but if you know the terms, if you know what is an attribute, what is a tuple and what is a relation, means the basic terms if you know, then it will be clear for you and you are not able to confuse while you are creating the table. So that's why I am stressing the terms, the attributes, the relation and the tuples. Okay, so next point, key attribute means this is a key attribute. These are all attributes, but in these attributes I am selecting one attribute as a key. So the key attribute cannot have null values. So another point you have to be remember while you are creating a tables, the key attribute should not be a null value, means 0 should not be there here. Okay, so a value should be there in a key attribute. And next, if there are more than one such minimal subset, you call it as minimal subsets, these are called candidate keys. So this concept I'll explain when I'm discussing about the keys. So don't be confused here. So if there are more than one such minimal subsets, if we are having more than one subsets, these you call it as a candidate key. So this point you just leave here. While I explain about the candidate key, then you came across, then you will know what this point means. Okay, so now if I tell about candidate keys now, it will be confused for you. So don't be confused. So just note this point. If there are more than one such minimal subset, these are called candidate keys. So this is about the key constraints. So next, coming to the next constraint, that is the domain constraint. So domain is the value that is present in a table. So the points you have to be remember while you are discussing about domain constraint is every attribute is bound to have a specific range of values. The only point is every value means every attribute. Suppose if you take whatever the attribute is bound, every attribute is bound to have a specific range of values. So what it means, every attribute is bound to a specific range of values, means whatever the attribute that are present, what are the fields that are present in a table, those fields should have a specific range. Suppose if you take the name should only the character. Means the name holds only the character. Suppose if you take the ID is only holds the integer value. Means it is bound to a particular range, specific range. Suppose the name is, if you take name as an integer, is anyone having the name as 1, 2, 3? Is anyone having the names 30, 40, 50 like that? Okay. So you have to maintain whatever the attribute you are taken, that should have a specific range of values. Means if you take ID is always, it should be an integer value. If you take the name should always, it is a character value. So that you call it as a domain constraint. Constraint means condition. So for each attribute, each value, whatever that is entering in the table, it having some condition you have to follow. If you want to make this table as a valid. What that condition? That value, whatever you are entering in the table, that is having a specific range of values. Means some condition. So the name should follow only the characters. So whatever the ID that you are entering in the rows, those should be only the integers. That is a constraint. That condition you have to be followed. So example for this is, age cannot be negative. So you cannot enter the age negative value. Okay. So or less than 0. So less than 0. And at the same time, the phone number should be always 0 to 9. The phone number should be always in between 0 to 9. So these are the constraints you have to follow while you are creating the table. Now let us see the third constraint, that is the referential integrity constraint. Referential integrity constraints. So what is the referential integrity constraints? So here, work on the concept. So referential means the name itself is indicating it is a foreign key. So work on the concept of foreign key. So that I'll explain while I'm explaining about the keys. So the referential integrity constraint always works on the concept of foreign key, and a foreign key is a key. It's a key attribute. So whatever the name itself, key is nothing but it is basically completely based upon the attribute. So a foreign key is a key attribute of a relation, means in a table, of a table, that can be referred in another table, another relation. So that you call it as a foreign key. So don't be confused. A foreign key is you just call it as a key attribute. This key attribute depends upon another table. So that I explained in the keys. Okay. So with the help of this foreign key, you are maintaining one constraint, that is a referential integrity constraint. So this is about the constraints. Thank you.